Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Thank you for coming here. I disagree with a lot of what you said tonight.
Good. That makes it fun.
I don't believe that being transgender means that you have some sort of mental illness.
Okay.
And I think that the majority of the psychological, national associations would agree with that. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that institutional racism exists, and that it manifests itself in very real and negative and harmful ways.
Okay.
But I don't feel any violence or animosity towards you, and I would say that most of the people that I know might wish that you wouldn't spread ideas. They might wish that you wouldn't spread ideas that they find harmful and negative, but they don't feel any direct ill will towards you in any violent way that they would carry out. So I guess what I've been feeling throughout this talk is kind of this vast mischaracterization of the left as some sort of homogenous, violent, oppressive body. And I think that the majority of the people that I know and the majority of the interactions that I've had with communities on a larger scale have not matched that representation. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about the nonviolence.
So there are two aspects to the nonviolence, okay? And I think one you will agree with and one you will disagree with. So the one that you will agree with is the one that you've already agreed with, which is that you don't get to hurt people just because of what they're saying, right? This we all agree with. This is also the distinction. There's a reason I use the word leftist and not the word liberal. I think there is a distinction between people who are liberals and people who are leftists. I think that people who are liberals may disagree with me on politics, but they don't feel that they get to use force to shut people down. Leftists don't feel the same ways. That is natural distinction. Now, here's the part where we'll disagree. I think that if you are seeking to use the government to cram down your particular vision of society on individuals in violation of their freedom, that this is an aspect of totalitarianism. Whether you want to shut me down or whether you want to, let's pretend for a second that I were a baker. And let's say that I'm a religious baker. I'm a religious person, so let's say I were a baker. And let's say that I don't want to participate in a same-sex wedding because I feel that that's sinful in my own religious belief. My belief is that's none of your business. The belief of most people on the left is that there should be legislation that forces me to cater to that same-sex wedding. By polls, this is true. So, now we're getting into dicey territory because now this does implicate violence. It implicates governmentally used violence. So, you can be, I'm happy you're libertarian essentially with regard to my speech. But when it comes to my behavior, you're significantly less libertarian than I am. You can do what you want, I don't care. But people on the left deeply care what I do in my personal life, that they have no right to my labor and they have no right to my services. So this is where the pedal hits the metal in terms of American politics, and this is where the pedal will hit the metal when the government starts getting more and more deeply involved. As far as the institutional racism, all I would ask you to consider, you can believe what you want, but I would ask you to consider this. Shouting institutional racism does not actually combat racism. You have to find individual instances, and you have to show me who the racists are so that we can fight them together. I hate racism. I think it's evil. But if you're just going to say institutional racism every time something bad happens, there's no way to fight it. I need a policy that you're proposing, or I need a person who's actually racist so that we can fight it together, or we can determine whether the policy is good. What I find really problematic is the virtue signaling that I see by so many people on the other side, which is, I don't have to give you the racist, I don't have to tell you who he is or what measures I'm proposing. I just say institutional racism, everybody cheers for me because that's an approved point of view, and now we move on with our lives. You haven't helped anybody, you've just made yourself feel better. If you want to have her respond, please.
Well, I think that institutional racism in and of itself, first of all, I would say that the majority of the people that do bring up institutional racism do also have solutions as to how to combat it. But
it invariably involve encroaching on other people's liberty. But yes.
Well, I would just say that there is kind of, again, I feel like you're painting a wide and diverse group of people with the same brush, and saying that if you can't point to a policy, or if you can't point to a person, then you're just wasting everyone's time. And I think that a lot of people are trying to point to policies, and while I think that the idea of pointing to a racist person is fundamentally in contrast with the idea of institutional racism, because institutional racism grapples with implicit bias in the society as a whole, or not like a ghost in the machine, but in individuals.
Unless you're connecting that to a policy, it's a cop-out. Because now we're ghost hunting again. If you just said to me, we have a problem in American society, income inequality, right, is a problem in American society. If you just gave me any problem, and I said, well, that's the Bilderbergs' fault, right? That's the fault of the Bilderbergs, right? It's a conspiracy. It's the fault of the Bilderbergs, right? There are all these conspiracy theories about the Bilderberg group. So let's say that it's the Bilderbergs' fault, or it's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's whatever it is. There's some conspiracy out there. You would say to me, that's not useful because what are you even talking about? When you say institutional racism, it's too broad. You at least have to name me the institution. Which one is the racist one? Which institution is racist? Tell me which, so we can fight it seriously. So we can fight it together. Just shouting slogans like institutional racism it's not effective. Shouting white privilege is not effective. I want to be on your side. I do. I want to fight racists. I think racism is. I think racist behavior is evil. I want to fight it with you, but I can't fight it if you're not showing me what it is. And we have to decide together if the policies you're proposing will alleviate racism or exacerbate racism. And it turns out, I think that a lot of the policies proposed by the left, I think institutional racism is usually a lever for proposing a policy that is actually unpalatable to freedom, and then castigating people on the other side of that policy as being in league with the institutional racism. The policies are good or bad without regard to words like institutional racism, is what I'm saying. Honestly, I would love to sit down and talk with you for an hour about it because it's a worthwhile conversation, and I think we could actually get somewhere with it. But I think that slogans generally tend not to be.
Visitor to Trump Tower, comedian Steve Harvey, dropped by on Friday to meet with the president-elect, and then he found himself on the receiving end of some serious heat for doing so. Watch this.
I love Steve Harvey and I have respect for Steve Harvey, and I think his intentions were accurate or appropriate rather. But my disagreement is the way in which he's being used by folk like Donald Trump. Because to keep bringing up comedians and actors and athletes to represent black interests is demeaning, it's disrespectful, and it's condescending. It was a bunch of mediocre Negroes being dragged in front of TV as a photo op for Donald Trump's exploitative campaign against black people.
Wow. All right, joining me now, Michael Eric Dyson is a Georgetown University professor of sociology, and he is the author of the new book, Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. And we welcome him here tonight. Good to have you with us tonight, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You see what's going on there, and you've written a book. Talk to me a little bit about that in context with what you see going on around you.
Well, in my book, I talk about the way in which white America has viewed race, has been taught to think about race, and has not been self-conscious about their racial formation. They don't think of themselves as having a race in the same way when men hear gender, they think, oh, that's a bunch of women. No, that's you too. You're a man. Many white Americans are not taught to think about race in a self-conscious way. So what I wanted to do is to invite white Americans into a conversation about race, to think about how it's constructed, about how white innocence, white fragility, white vulnerability are all thrown in there together, and how sometimes white people get resentful, understandably, of being asked to talk about a subject that they have no skills to talk about because they've not been practiced in it. So what I wanted to do is to talk about this in a serious way. Police brutality, to talk about the kind of resurgence of racism, especially in regard to President Obama, and then talk about the broader culture in which we live, where racial animus, anti-black sentiments have been expressed and unleashed, and how we negotiate those. So I wanted to, as a minister, preach to white America.
I think we hear so much more about racism now than we did when I was growing up. I feel like relationships were better then. And I wonder why, after 8 years of having our first African-American president, we find ourselves in such a divisive period. How do you think that reflects on him, perhaps? And do you believe it does?
Well, it does in this sense. I think Barack Obama's presence provoked a kind of nastiness and viciousness. For instance, you can have legitimate disagreements with Barack Obama and not be accused of being a racist. But there's no denying that a lot of the sentiment against Obama was racially driven. For instance, if you're debating him about health care, why put a voodoo doctor up? When police departments are caught on tape speaking about Barack Obama in disparaging terms, why refer to his wife as a simian? In other words, the racial stereotypes that were so deep and profound have gutted any sense of having honest differences of opinion politically or ideologically. And as a result of that, Barack Obama became a lightning rod for that.
Respond, if you would, to the argument that we just saw on that tape.
Right.
The use of the phrase mediocre Negroes. I mean, you've got Steve Harvey going over there to have a conversation. He said, look, I'm going to give this president a chance. What is wrong with that?
Look, there's nothing wrong. Steve Harvey, as was said, is a remarkable man and a successful man. There's no problem with that. The problem is Donald Trump, not Steve Harvey. Look, if you want to have a conversation in white America, do you go to Miley Cyrus or Mitch McConnell? The point is that why do an end run around Mitch McConnell or John Boehner or Paul Ryan and speak to, say, I don't know, George Clooney? The point is that there are political representatives of African American culture. So you're
saying Steve Harvey isn't the person for that conversation with President Donald Trump?
I'm saying that if you're talking about serious issues of weight, value, and gravitas in Black America, no, I don't think a comedian is the top of the list.
But Leonardo DiCaprio can go talk about climate change with President Obama, and Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt are perfectly suited to go to the White House.
Policy. I think, look, Steve Harvey should have the right.
But they did that all the time. They talked about policy at the White House.
I love Steve Harvey, but I don't think Steve Harvey should be.
But who are you to say that Steve Harvey can't go have a conversation with Donald Trump? And if he does, he's going to be criticized for it.
I'm saying, look, he can be criticized for it.
You're saying he wasn't the right guy.
I'm saying Steve Harvey is a friend of mine and I love him. I'm saying Steve Harvey is not the person who was on the point, is the point man for discussing policy in Black America. I'm saying there are many people who are practicing that, who deal with that every day, who have strategic advantages because they've been thinking about this. Steve Harvey is the attempt by Donald Trump to avoid dealing with some serious weight and theological and theoretical and sociological analysis about what's going on in the community. Have a conversation with Steve Harvey. That's beautiful. But also have a conversation with people who have been thinking about this. William Jewis Wilson, a sociologist who's been thinking about this at Harvard. Turn to people who have been reflecting on this politically. And when you do that, then you have both Steve Harvey, who has a right to go to the White House, and those who have expertise in gravitas.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Look forward to it.
Mr. Dyson. So here with more, Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com, with his thoughts on this controversy. Ben, good evening to you. You heard our conversation, and you heard the piece of sound there from Mark Lamont Hill talking about mediocre Negroes that he said were paraded, basically to check boxes for Donald Trump. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, anybody who says that somebody's a mediocre Negro because they disagree politically makes you a less than mediocre person. I mean, it's really quite a disgusting thing to say. And I don't think it's intellectually honest for Professor Dyson to be talking about how they were just wanting someone with more expertise. Because I really doubt that if Donald Trump had invited Thomas Sowell, for example, or Jason Riley of the Wall Street Journal to come in and talk about housing policy, they would have been supremely happy either. What this really is about is there's a cadre of people on the left who get very insulted anytime a Republican reaches out to a prominent black person who doesn't immediately slap that hand away and say, listen, you guys are the bad guys, because too many folks on the left like to racially polarize in order to make hay politically, and that really is quite terrible. I mean, the fact is that if we're going to build a better country, we're going to need to reach across the aisle, not just on racial lines, but along political lines, and labeling everybody one way politically based on the color of their skin is the essence of racism. The idea that your race is inherently connected with your political thought is inherently racist, and the left refuses to acknowledge that, unfortunately.
How do we, what can Donald Trump do to sort of start to bridge that divide? And do you have any hope that he can?
Listen, I think Trump's actually doing the right thing on a lot of these things. I think that when Trump invites people like Steve Harvey, or when he invites Jim Brown, or when he invites any of the other people he's been inviting to talk. Martin Luther King III, is that somebody who lacks gravitas? And when he invites all of these people to Trump Tower to talk about this stuff, I think that he's actually attempting to reach out. Now, whether you think that's just PR or not, doesn't really matter. The bottom line is, what would Trump do differently if he were actually reaching out as opposed to doing PR? I'm not sure he would be doing anything differently. And again, the idea that the left can object to celebrity involvement in politics, I didn't see them whining and crying when Meryl Streep was ripping Donald Trump up and down over the Golden Globes.
There wouldn't be an issue here, would they? Because they could give the insurance, whatever insurance, and they could rest assured that their employees would choose like they would.
The question in Hobby Lobby is whose freedom is being infringed upon. Employees' freedom is not infringed upon when they enter into a consensual relationship with an employer that includes certain types of health care.
Not consensual.
Of course it is. They can quit. Who is forcing them? Where is the gun? Where is the gun? Who is forcing them? Where is the chain? Who is locking them to their desk?
Stop with the gun language.
This is the reason that I use the gun language is because locking them to their desk.
Stop with the gun language.
The reason that I use the gun language is
the
reason that I use the gun language is because it is vitally important for people to understand that every government measure at the end of the day must be compelled by force. That's what government measures are for. There is a vast difference, a huge difference in terms of personal liberty and freedom between the government compelling behavior and a company saying that we are not going to provide certain types of coverage, and if you don't like that, you can quit or buy your own coverage. There's a vast difference. The gun's the whole issue.
I'm feeling really powerful right now.
For sure, by the way.
You're going to submit to us. Our time of liberalism is here. You drink that fluoride. You take those vaccines. Donald Trump says vaccines might be dangerous because one of his kids got hurt. Shut up! You don't have free speech. You understand? You listen to me. I rule this country now. I'm liberal. Screw him. Ban his free speech right now. Ban it! Let me tell you what else you do. You don't visit InfoWarsLife.com with the #1 new vitamin.
He's and brilliant seg. I mean, he segues right into an ad for some sort of fusion vitamin. So that's great. This guy, by the way, is considered a leading Trump ally, Alex Jones. I don't know why. I can't understand it. Look at this. Look what's underneath here. It's another shirt. Why? Why? Because I don't want to go to the cleaners that often. That's why. Come on. Okay, so it's just, I think it says something about our country when that guy is a leading is a leading advocate for one of the president. No, I mean, it isn't. This is actually how a lot of millennials think, and this is how the Occupy Wall Street movement thinks. This is a group of people who graduated with degrees in lesbian dance theory and then were surprised when they didn't get a six-figure paycheck out of college. I mean, this is, unfortunately, they were getting a paycheck consummate with their education level. The problem is that if you have to be productive in a capitalist society in order to earn anything. And this is, unfortunately, a lazy generation, a generation that expects things. And ignorant and communist is no way to go through life.
Most dealers are good. Gun dealers are good. Let me finish. But the NRA has all but neutered the ATF. All but neutered. And there are, well, we haven't had an ATF director for the last 10 years. We haven't had an ATF director for the last 10 years because the NRA won't even allow us to have a Surgeon General because the guy wanted common sense gun control.
Well, the ATF is a little bit busy smuggling guns south of the border to the drug cartels.
And say whether or not he should be considered someone who is a hero and inspirational to other young men out there.
Well, here's actually the problem that I have. I think that you can accept and tolerate people's behavior, and that, you know, demonstrates non-homophobia. I think that it is ridiculous to suggest that just because you're not celebrating, you know, on the cover of Sports Illustrated, somebody coming out of the closet, and you think, you know, it's relatively unimportant in the grand scheme of things because people should be able to live their lives the way that they want. I don't really understand. You know, there were folks who were saying that that was a homophobic tweet. I'm still confused as to how it's homophobic simply to say that you don't think it's a heroic move in today's America to come out of the closet the same way that it was maybe 20 years ago.
Some people making below $15 an hour make ends meet by receiving government benefits in the form of food stamps and/or other subsidies. Some assert that this essentially means governments have enabled businesses to pay less and keep more for their bottom lines, resulting in subsidized corporate profits and people more dependent on government. Ben Shapiro, as a conservative who advocates for less dependency on government, why do you object to this reasoning?
I don't object to that reasoning. I think it's 100% true. I think the major problem that we have with regard to food stamps supplementing people's wages is that these companies are being paid off by the government. I mean, they're getting enormous subsidies from the federal government in the form of food stamps, and There are two ways that you can correct that in terms of wages. The first way that you can correct that in terms of wages would be with a measure like the minimum wage, which, as we'll argue about tonight, decreases, in my opinion, employment. The evidence, I believe, tends to show that it decreases employment, or at the very least puts a cap on it and makes it more difficult for small businesses to operate while big businesses are still getting these subsidies. And second of all, it creates a corrupt system where certain businesses benefit more than others. The second way that you're going to be able to prevent all of this is if you cut back a lot of these subsidies, forcing businesses to compete for labor. Labor is just like any other good in a free market. That means that people have to compete for it. So if you want wages to go up, then get rid of the government paying the other half of the wage, and you will see the wages automatically increase. I think that we should all be able to agree on the idea that wages need to increase. I think the difference is that the way to make wages increase is to have a fully consensual relationship between employer and employee. And I think this is really the root of the morality of minimum wage when it comes down to it. And in two sentences here is that I would never force an employee to work for an employer at a given wage. That violates the 13th Amendment and constitutes slavery or indentured servitude. By the same token, I would never force an employer to pay a given wage to an employee, because that is a lack of consent on the part of the employer and violates basic principles of fairness as well as freedom. And when it comes to college admissions, for example, there are more women than men going to college. That's correct. When it comes to graduate schools, there are more women than men going to graduate schools. Okay, when it comes to jail, which you just cited, the vast, well over 90% of the people in jail are men. Is that because the system is sexist against men? That the jailing system is now sexist against men because there are more men than women in prison? That's really your argument.
No, it does have to also be the case that more men commit crimes.
There you go. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the precedent in California for a second. In California, there are 30,000 mentally ill people who have guns. They have a grand total of 33 people, really, in the state of California, who are tasked with taking these 30,000 guns away from these 30,000 mentally ill people. Okay, we're creating a system that is either not going to be enforced or it's going to be over-enforced. This idea, if we can just trust the government, then why aren't we just trusting the government to do the right thing now? I don't understand why a piece of legislation makes them better at what they do. I mean, the government is not very good at what they're doing now. Why does new wording make them not suck?
Because
hello everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.
Talk a little bit about
Sure.
the
So
nonviolent.
there are two aspects to the nonviolence, okay? And I think one you will agree with and one you will disagree with. So the one that you will agree with is the one that you've already agreed with, which is that you don't get to hurt people just because of what they're saying, right? This we all agree with. This is also the distinction. There's a reason I use the word leftist and not the word liberal. I think there is a distinction between people who are liberals and people who are leftists. I think that people who are liberals may disagree with me on politics, but they don't feel that they get to use force to shut people down. Leftists don't feel the same ways. That is natural distinction. Here's the part where we'll disagree. I think that if you are seeking to use the government to cram down your particular vision of society on individuals in violation of their freedom, that this is an aspect of totalitarianism. Whether you want to shut me down or whether you want to, let's pretend for a second that I were a baker, and let's say that I'm a religious baker. I'm a religious person, so let's say I were a baker. And let's say that I don't want to participate in a same-sex wedding because I feel that that's sinful in my own religious belief. My belief is that's none of your business. The belief of most people on the left is that there should be legislation that forces me to cater to that same-sex wedding. By polls, this is true. So, now we're getting into dicey territory because now this does implicate violence. It implicates government.
Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want. and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Thank you for coming here. I disagree with a lot of what you've said tonight.
Good. That makes it fun.
I don't believe that being transgender means that you have some sort of mental illness.
Okay.
And I think that the majority of the psychological, national associations would agree with that. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that institutional racism exists, and that it manifests itself in very real and negative and harmful ways.
Okay.
But I don't feel any violence or animosity towards you, and I would say that most of the people that I know might wish that you wouldn't spread ideas. They might wish that you wouldn't spread ideas that they find harmful and negative, but they don't feel any direct ill will towards you in any violent way that they would carry out. So I guess what I've been feeling throughout this talk is kind of this vast mischaracterization of the left as some sort of homogenous, violent, oppressive body. And I think that the majority of the people that I know and the majority of the interactions that I've had with communities on a larger scale have not matched that representation. So I was wondering if you could kind of